This is the Game of Life. Nothing like a little good Quincy Jones. This is the Game of Life. I'm Gale Nelson, President and CEO of Big Brothers Big Sisters Miami, and I'm pleased to be here today in studio with a gentleman I've come to know and respect right from the start. Sitting in a training, seeing the intentionality and the passion through which he trains. Quentin, is so good to have you with us today. Quentin Williams, and now founder of Dedication to Community. I want to make sure I give you the proper introduction as well, brother. Welcome to the Game of Life. Welcome to Big Brothers Big Sisters of Miami.
Thank you so much, Gale. I appreciate you, bro.
Oh, no, it's an absolute pleasure. Let's start just right from the start. Now, your background is quite unique. So talk about your background, your leadership journey, before we get into some of the things you're doing right now in the community.
Oh, thanks, Gale. I've been blessed. It's been a journey full of challenges, struggles, pain, trauma. But as I think about that, I always know that there's a purpose behind all of that. And growing up in New York, after being born on the island of St. Thomas, my mother raised my brother and me in Yonkers, New York, and very proud of Yonkers. Did all my K through 12 schooling there with a reading deficit, with a literacy issue. I couldn't really understand words. I had a comprehension issue. That lasted me for all of my K through 12 and into my adulthood, but my mother embraced me. She always told me I could be whatever I want to be, even with those issues. And I believed her. Thankfully, I believed her. And got a scholarship to go to Boston College, played football at Boston College, played with Doug Flutie, saw him win the Heisman in front of my eyes, and saw him, he's 5'6", 140 pounds. And he might say he's 5'9", 170, but to see somebody that size being named the best college football player in the world expanded my world. And so now, on top of what my mother had already instilled in me, I believed I could do anything because I just saw Doug Flutie win the Heisman. And so I went to law school with the reading deficit because a mentor of mine, Jay Brusman, told me I could be an attorney. I didn't know what an attorney was, but he was an attorney. So I wanted to be like him, and I applied, and I got in. And I learned to read between Boston College and St. John's University School of Law. That's where I really learned to read, to understand words. And I became a voracious reader now. I still don't know what I have. Maybe it's ADHD. There's something that prevents me, if I'm not fully concentrating, from understanding what I'm reading. And moving on from there, I was recruited by the FBI and became an FBI agent, which was conflicting with my childhood because my friends were getting placed behind bars by law enforcement. So I didn't really want to be a cop. But I thought I could change the system if I just figured out what that system was. So I entered into law enforcement so that I could help to nuance and tweak the system. And I then became a federal prosecutor after that to fully understand the system, and was recruited by the NFL, the NBA, the Jacksonville Jaguars, worked for all three of those organizations. And when I was at the NBA, a friend of mine who had previously told me, Chris Palmer told me one day when I was at the Jaguars, he said, in sports, you are nobody until somebody fires you. Now, I didn't know what that meant. Coming from his perspective, he's a coach, so he's getting fired every 3 years, and players get fired all the time. None of them, maybe 0.1% of them, retire on their own terms. So I could understand from a coach's standpoint what he was talking about, but I was in the front office, so didn't quite know what he meant. And then when I went to the NBA, I worked there for about a year and a half, was called into the office of the president of the league, and he said, "You're fired." And it changed my world. It changed my world in the beginning, not for the better, because I was lost. I'd never been fired. I wanted to be a GM and at some point ultimately an owner of a professional franchise. But what it did for me was, you have to be forced out of your comfort zone. I was comfortable in corporate America. It forced me out of that zone. And so I then decided, okay, this is what I'm supposed to be doing. I'm supposed to be an entrepreneur because I couldn't get the job that I wanted at the pay scale that I wanted at that point. I had people offering me jobs, but it wasn't what I wanted. And so I just developed my own businesses, started a media company, then a law firm, a consultancy, all three of which I have now, and Dedication to Community, a not-for-profit organization, which concentrates on, it's very focused on empowering society in the arena, the justice arena. And so that's what my life is. I found my purpose with Dedication to Community.
Let's go back. You talk about your childhood, and I've heard you, I've been to your incredible trainings. A loving mother, despite the obstacles, domestic challenges, and anything along those lines. But she told you that you can. That still drives you today, Quentin.
Oh yeah. It's my mother is my queen, and my mother she's had her own sets of challenges, struggles, trauma. She was abused from a young age, and that abuse manifest when she was older with her children, with me, and she suffered from deep depression. Couldn't get out of bed at times for months at a time. My mother is the most loving person I've ever met. She's incredibly loving. And even through her challenges, we knew that she loved us, that she cared about us, and that she never looked at any person for their differences. She recognized differences, she appreciates differences, but she never judged people for any reason. She just accepted people as equals and always did that and built great relationships. The relationships she has are decades-old relationships. And so she taught my brother and me about that building of relationships. And so my brother and I have the same thing. I have relationships with people who I've known since I was 4. It's incredible what she instilled in us.
The power of relationships. Here in the studio with Quentin Williams, Dedication to Community. Incredible, passionate leader, individual, building relationships. But as we think about the power of mentoring, and as we talk to folks who say, well, mentoring is nice. I mean, we had a brief tour of our headquarters here with some of our donor partners, and the conversation that I've had today, and a conversation I have very often. People talk about mentoring just being nice. But you referenced in your leadership journey, a mentor, somebody that you wanted to emulate. He was an attorney, said, you're going to be an attorney. You went to law school. The power of mentoring. You mentioned it, but let's revisit that for just a minute. Talk about, you're training police officers. We're going to get to that in a minute. You're dealing with, you've gone through, and I've heard some of the things you've experienced, and you can share as you feel that you deem appropriate, but let's talk about the power of mentoring for a minute. Not only how in your life, but what you see happening in relationships in the social justice space.
Yeah, the power of mentoring. I mean, I am who my relationships are. The people who I've associated with in my life have determined my destiny. Because I grew up in Yonkers, New York, during the crack epidemic, and a lot of my friends who I played ball with or went to school with, they were getting involved in that industry, and we were poor. We needed money. We were on welfare. First 17 years of my life spent on welfare. So getting approached by those who were in the industry to be a part of the industry was tempting to a point. I didn't want to break my mother's heart. It always came down to that. My mother's heart would be broken if anything happened to me, and my friends were getting eaten by the streets. They were going behind bars because they were being arrested and convicted. So mentoring is what kept me from doing that. My mother's mentoring, but then those who were introduced to me, my grandparents introduced me to Jay Brussman, and Jay Brussman was that attorney, and he's the one who, when I got out of Boston College, I couldn't get a job. I had a degree in economics. I was trying to get a job, couldn't get one, so I just took a job as a bouncer, and I was bouncing, and I was perfectly happy doing that. And Jay then got me a job with his brother-in-law as a paralegal on Wall Street, and as I was still bouncing, he kept saying to me, it was like weekly. He'd say, you're not going to do that for the rest of your life. He said, you need to go to law school now. You need to go now. Don't wait too long because you won't go back. And so I applied just to satisfy him because he was doing this every week he was on me, and they accepted me. I got in. So now I had to go. And so I went to law school, and I got in. I had a reading deficit at the time. So law school's no place for a reading deficit. I learned to read really efficiently in law school. And it wasn't a simple thing. It took a lot of effort. I was probably working 4 times harder than my classmates, but all worth it. And Jay is the reason why everything happened in my professional career, because if I didn't go to law school, I wouldn't have become an FBI agent, certainly not a federal prosecutor. And then the jobs with the NFL and the NBA, and they wouldn't have come because the skill set that I needed, I acquired in law school and then throughout my early career. So he had an immense effect on me, and he's just one of many. There's a village of people who did that for me over the course of my journey.
As I think about the NBA in 2020, we were just yearning for any kind of sport. I remember when Michael Jordan's Last Dance came out, it was like manna from heaven in terms of just something on TV. But the NBA, while they were playing in the bubble, and then, of course, post-George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, then all of a sudden, there's no game tonight. We're shutting it down, not because of COVID, but social justice. And I'm sitting there with my kids. It's like, whoa. Then Doc Rivers gets up, and he's crying. We care about folks, but people don't care about us. So many different quotes of the Milwaukee Bucks standing together. The Miami Heat have made a tremendous commitment, and certainly the Miami Heat are stalwart partners of Big Brothers, Big Sisters of Miami. Dedication to community in the Miami Heat. Talk about what you all are doing together in the social justice space.
Well, this is an example of the result of relationships, because Steve Stowe from the Miami Heat is like a little brother to me, a younger brother to me. I've known him for over a quarter of a century. And before he was with the Miami Heat, we were friends. Steve is one of the primary reasons why we are partnered with the Miami Heat. And then the Miami Police Department, one of my students from the FBI National Academy, where I taught for a couple of years, is an assistant chief, Charisse Goss at the Miami Police Department, and she knows what we bring to the table in terms of training and what I had the opportunity to do, and this is the blessing of relationships, is just make the connection that we all have with each other. And here's how God works. Charisse and Steve already knew each other. So it was a simple thing. And as a result, the Miami Heat, Miami Police Department, and D2C are partnered to deliver training on relationship building, on how do we fill this void with meaningful relationships. And that's what we're delivering to the Miami Police Department through the funding of the Miami Heat, through the partnership and participation of the Miami Heat. It's not just about funding. It's about their active participation. And then, of course, the Miami Police Department. Getting access to police is not an easy thing to do. Relationships drove it. And it's been extremely successful. The data has supplied us with the metrics for that success.
And I've had the pleasure of sitting in. That's how I met you. Relationships. Here we are. Again, shout out to Steve Stowe and the entire City of Miami Police Department, all our friends over to Miami Heat as well. As I think about sitting there and you walking through some of your, even as a former FBI agent, some of your police encounters and how you are now strengthening relationships, cutting through the tension, allowing folks that have been injured in some way to express that and to listen to each other. I was blown away with how you, and shout out to Kim as well, your business partner in terms of D2C. I'm just sitting there, seeing the discomfort that relationships challenge, and how you mitigate through conversation and role playing and sharing. I just can't stress enough how powerful it is. And what kind of feedback are you getting from police departments locally as well as throughout the land?
Yeah, well, thank you for coming to that session. And Steve had been talking about you. He adores you, and then you shared a story of yours that was deep. And so what we see from just the conversations afterwards and the data is that this is connecting law enforcement and the community that they serve. We're one community. That's what this comes down to. We're not them versus us. It's all of us. And we see that connection is happening right before our eyes in those sessions. That's
Yes.
this is what's transformative about the whole thing. It's happening right before our eyes because law enforcement officers are the most raw, the toughest audience to crack. They come in with their arms folded, a lot of them. They don't know what they're going to get. A lot of them are being thrown under the bus. They don't think that they're being treated fairly. And we're not here to throw them under the bus. We're here to get them to be introspective and to understand what the community is feeling. And the community is in these sessions as well. And those folks from the community are getting to see firsthand the pain that law enforcement feels, the insecurity about approaching the unknown. We sometimes think law enforcement are robots. This takes that away when community, they're sitting there watching and sometimes seeing the tears flow from law enforcement. I tell you, the connection that we see makes it all worth it. And I think about how many lives are going to be affected by this? How many people will reap the benefits of this? I did this to save my son's life. I'm on a chase for my kids' lives every day. And so I think about the children of my friends, the children of society, and how many of those lives will be transformed because law enforcement officers will have transformed themselves. It's a purpose-driven journey, and I'm just very thankful.
Being in one of the breakouts with law enforcement and seeing, and it's so important, everybody sees the humanity in one another. And just because you have on a uniform, those feelings, the emotions, the response to the media, the perception, and we recognize clearly, for anyone that's listening, there have been clear, not just mistakes, but there have been just, people have lost their lives. No one's discounting that. We're talking about the opportunity to prevent future harm emotionally, physically, and the trauma that you've experienced with the law enforcement encounter, the trauma I've experienced with the law enforcement encounter. But here we are saying, let's be a part of the solution. And so I just want to stress to all those that are listening, we're here in studio with Quentin Williams from D2C, Dedication to Community, making it happen, addressing relationships, building on relationships here at Big Brothers, Big Sisters of Miami. And I just look forward, Q, to doing more with you. We've broken bread together. I've had the benefit and the pleasure of being in your trainings with D2C. You're stuck with me now, brother. So I'm just letting you know that. So as we look forward to what you're doing here locally and nationally, it is my desire to get you all on the national stage, Big Brothers, Big Sisters. I'm putting it on record today. But not only that, because there's so many that can benefit from just reinforcing relationships. So before we close the show today, the first of many shows we'll have you on, what's the future look like? What gives you hope for the future? You're in the trenches, not only with law enforcement, but with the local communities, both here in Miami, and we're so pleased to have you all helping invest and strengthen the city of Miami, and not just city of Miami, but all of Miami-Dade County. What gives you hope for the future, brother?
I come down to Miami once per month because we train the Miami PD. We work with the Miami Heat. I have to say, on this trip, as an example, I got to come here and see you and your inspiration. What you're doing here is tremendous, and that gives me great hope. I gave the keynote at today's convocation at Florida Memorial University, and I looked out into the audience and I saw the wonderment in the eyes of these young leaders. It encourages me so much, gives me great hope. And tomorrow we'll have our third session this week with the Miami PD and the Miami Heat. And after every session, I have to take pause. I have to actually be by myself, because I think about, in that audience, the result of that session will be that there's one person out there whose life might be completely transformed. And it might not be any of the people who were present, but they're going to touch somebody because of something that they got out of that class that will transform maybe the dynamic that somebody in the community has with law enforcement. Maybe it's saving somebody's life. This is what gives me hope. This is what encourages me. I feel like I'm so blessed to just be a small part of all that's happening in this area, in this arena. And I appreciate you being a part of this. Really do.
Well, we're blessed to have you as not only as a friend, but to build these relationships. Little things mean a lot. It's like after a game, as you know, you just have to kind of decompress a little bit. When you put your heart and soul into something like building these relationships like you do with D2C and what we do here at Big Brothers Big Sisters, I want to encourage anyone that's out there listening. You've heard from Q how he was mentored. We mentor every day. If there's somebody out there that wants to get involved, bbbsmiami.org, bbbsmiami.org. Get involved, become a big. For those law enforcement entities that are out there, very special shout out to all the chiefs who truly not only are becoming bigs, Q, but are encouraging their officers, sworn and non-sworn, to get involved as well. So for all our Bigs and Blue partners, thank you for what you're doing. At the end of the day, Q, keep doing what you're doing, brother, because like you said, when one person mentors, two people smile.
Absolutely.
That's what it's all about.
Yes.
Thank you, brother, for
God
what you
bless
are, who you are, and what you do. Let's go.
God bless you. Thank you.
Hey, this is Gale Nelson, President and CEO of Big Brothers Big Sisters Miami, the host of The Game of Life, where everybody makes the team, but how you play is up to you.